Style is never natural. Its nature is that it must be acquired. The finishing touches of style are best self-taught, but the basic exercises that lead to style can be learned from others. If a tutor of any subject does not also teach style, he must at least teach the need for it. This necessity does not yet seem to be universally recognized, not even in the world of education. When I was a model, working mainly in art schools in the home counties around London, I spent many enlightening hours in railway carriages stuffed with teachers bound for the same destination as myself. Their discourse made me realize that modern education stands ineffectually trembling in the livid and apocalyptic light of the 2-day week. This was not the first time I found it necessary to revise my original notion of the purpose of education. When I was a child, I never thought as a child. I subscribed meekly to my parents' idea that a good education was a protracted one. Scholarship seemed to them to be a weapon for use against a hostile world, and I often heard my mother nagging my father to equip me with it. Later, there was a regrouping of forces. Operation Pelican set in. This consisted of their uniting to reproach me with the enormity of my school fees. This happened shortly before I left college. Then my views on education underwent their first drastic change. The scales fell from my eyes, and I saw the whole system as a gigantic extractor in which the government squeezed from its slaves whatever elemental juices they might contain, in the hope of coming across something upon which it could feed. Things have changed once again since then. I now realize that education is a last wild effort on the part of the authorities to prevent an overdose of leisure from driving the world mad. Learning is no longer an improver, it is merely the most expensive time filler the world has ever known. Most adult males have not yet begun to feel the rigors of the 2-day week. Indeed, their lust for overtime drives many of them to work more hours a day than their fathers ever did. The new education is therefore showered most lavishly upon women who stay at home and upon adolescents. The serious press puts forward the view that grown-up women spend their time flicking over the pages of glossy magazines and sighing, wandering from room to room, nay, from alcove to alcove in their open-plan dwellings, and yawning or looking out of windows worn thin with polishing, and waiting. In spite of the sentimentality of this picture, it is painted with a certain amount of realism. I have known many market research workers, and they tell me that householders seldom refuse to see them. Between adding water to the instant boeuf stroganoff and throwing away the disposable spode lie acres of unleavened time, which housewives are eager to spend, telling some complete stranger why they have abandoned one make of washing powder and bought another. Apparently they are so desperate that they have not even stopped to think that the information they are pouring out will fall into the hands of the enemy, the time savers. They seem unaware that they themselves are helping to design more machinery and manufacture more products that will leave them with more hours on their hands for entertaining more researchers. When one first contemplates this particular aspect of the problem of leisure, one cannot imagine why housewives do not simply bake a longer cake or wash clothes by hand. But this would not be a satisfactory answer. Such activity is lonely, boring, and even uncomfortable. Moreover, it plunges us into the William Morris error. Pursued to its limits, such a policy would bring back the homespun, the hand-done, 1,001 maddening archaic affectations. Any amount of neurosis, any depth of Bovaryism is better than that. Of course, the housewives I met in the art schools never admitted to any of this. They told me that while they draw and paint, vacuum cleaners call to them from half-open cupboards under the stairs, and weeds mock them from gravel paths. They boasted, that they never had a moment to spare. This is true. They had made sure that it should be true by availing themselves of the government's final solution to the problem of leisure. They had become what students call part-timers. They had taken up hobbies. We must therefore force ourselves, if only for a moment, to look into the theory behind taking up hobbies as it relates to style. We do this with some repugnance because it creates a world cluttered with things not very well done, but at first glance there seems to be no other way out of the modern predicament. Great ingenuity is shown by the authorities in this matter. This I know. In most of the institutes that employed me, the life room is on the top floor. It helps to preserve the La Bohème tradition. To reach my place of work, I climbed many flights of stairs and traversed many long corridors. As I went, I moved through air that was clamorous with the clash of fencing foils, over floors that shook with the Neolithic thump of Morris dancing. These two activities do represent an effort at that total physical coordination that is part of general happiness. But I also passed silent doors labeled wood carving, ceramics, and so on. In other words, most of the skills taught in evening institutes must be consumed on the premises. They bestow no expertise that can be flaunted in the process of living. On the contrary, once the school doors have shut behind the students, feelings of loneliness and inadequacy return, and, by contrast, strike with greater force. Evening classes are of use only if you learn to sing and dance, because these are activities the results of which the student takes out into the world with him and wears like a crown. People who have learned to sing, whether they ever sing professionally or not, will always have richer, rounder voices. People who have learned to dance will always have bigger, bolder movements. But of what use are pottery and basket weaving? Once the doors of the Evening Institute clang behind you, you're where you started. If on the way home you were to become involved in an argument with a stranger at a bus stop, you might find yourself saying, "Well, I can't express myself. You'll have to come and see one of my baskets." The cure for freedom is not a greater variety of hobbies. These are but anesthetics. They merely suppress the symptoms of derangement. Hobbies are instead of life. What is needed is a greater intensity of living style. You will never learn anything about style in a classroom. I have a television set so old that a friend, calling on me while it was on, said, "You're crazy keen about these horror films, aren't you?" What was, in fact, being shown was a party political broadcast. I have learned to interpret the dim, fractured image presented by my machine, and alas, can indulge in no confusion. When the picture on my screen is of a uniformed man prodding, pushing, or dragging a young person along a public thoroughfare, I know I am not watching Columbo, in which menace is often silken and most threats are oblique. No, I am seeing the news. The police have one way of dealing with the young. The rest of the world has gone to the opposite extreme. Mr. H. Munro, who, as Saki, gave short story readers much pleasure early in this century, pointed out that a soft answer does not turn away wrath, but rather inflames anger. This advice has not been heeded. Apart from annoying students, leniency gives them a false set of values. "We have our rights," they will say. Well, first of all, I don't think anyone has any rights. I think you fall out of your mother's womb, you crawl across open country under fire, you grab at what you want, and if you don't get it, you go without, and you flop into your grave. So you have to make up your mind whether to grab what you want, fight for it, or ask for it, because otherwise you will lose. There is a place in London called the London School of Economics. The students there wanted something or other, and caused such a riot that one of the janitors died. The press said to one of the leaders of this rebel, "Have you thought of using force to get what you want?" And the student said, "Haven't ruled out the idea." Now this is absolute nonsense. This is relying on the benignancy of precisely the order of things that you are criticizing. If force were used on both sides, a square mile around the London School of Economics would be evacuated, the army would be called in, and some policemen, and some innocent bystanders, and some soldiers might be killed, but all the students would die. Almost always what annoys students most is the suggestion that they have too much freedom. Being young, they have no historic sense, and therefore cannot compare present-day license with the restraint of past decades. I may remind my reader that this was published in 1979. "You can't screw girls of 15, one of them complained, incidentally using a word that would have got him expelled 15 years ago. The proposed remedy for their straitened circumstances is the revolution. The worrying word here is not revolution, but the. It shows that their dream is of an actual day, a particular event, whereafter everything will be different. They do not recognize that freedom may march, but will never stand still long enough to be measured. Beyond the horizon, sunlit, are other horizons, stormy. Revolt is a perpetual process, seldom increasing the amount of liberty in any society, but merely pushing it around a bit. What is so strange is that modern rebels march with their heads in a perpetual eyes left position. Their fiery gaze is forever fixed upon the Ural Mountains, at the edge of you-know-where, that land without lipstick that no true stylist can bring himself to name. Yet the history of that dreary region is a classic example of the uselessness of violent political action. There it was that those who slaughtered their heartless rulers fell almost immediately into the clenched fists of positively cruel oppressors. This fate was not just a piece of jolly bad luck. It was an instance of a universal law. Hereditary rulers assume their subjects are hereditary slaves, and are inclined to treat them with gracious condescension. Those who fight beside you on the barricades know from shared experience exactly what sort of swine you can be, and if they ever come to power, will handle you accordingly. Hence, the only sound that reaches our ears from behind that famous curtain is not a cheer of jubilation, but the bleating voice of the weak complaining that they are being victimized. I would have thought that devotees of political upheaval would rather instance the French Revolution. I am an inveterate cake-eater myself, but I would never deny that, after the decapitation of Miss Norma Shearer, France became an easier place to live in for a greater number of people. That is the most that you can ask. All the golden societies of the past, to which historians point and turn their wistful smiles, have had what patience players would call a discard pile. They operated on two levels, with a slave class who worked, ate, slept, and died, and a leisured class who reclined on one elbow and spoke. Naturally, it is from this latter group that we learn what life at that time was like. It often makes charming reading, but we can hardly take it to be the whole truth. There is no such thing as freedom for all. The word permissive cannot logically precede the word society. The difference between a mob and a society is order, and any order is prison for somebody. Men are not even born free. Merely to have parents is an almost intolerable restriction. Nor do men, as a rule, become free. When they leave home, they merely enter a more populous jail. The only thing that can be said for going out into the world is that one's failure to find fulfillment can be blamed on a larger number of people than the two unfortunate beings with whom one started off. Education meets the crisis by stepping into the student cage, flinging a heap of raw grants onto the sawdust, and retreating hastily. The wish that prompts his action is that these sops will be gobbled up and peace, at least temporarily, restored. The trouble with this scheme is that the number of subjects that can profitably be learned is fast decreasing. Skills are out. If we shall soon have machines into which you put sheep and they come out cardigans, why teach anyone to knit? Whatever is done in the next generation, apart from the computer man, everyone, as the author of Naked Lunch, Mr. William Burroughs, has said, will remain permanently angry because he can find nothing to do which he considers important. Some of the people who favor a policy of indulgence toward the young seek to justify it by claiming that teenagers will one day mature. What hope is there of this? Excessive experience does not lead to maturity, nor even to sophistication. On the contrary, it is crippling. Athletes agree that it is mild, but continual exercise that builds tissue. Violent activity breaks it down. As with the body, so with the soul. The feeling among the young that they are being indulged, that they are being patronized, however gravely their elders listen to them, is not by any means new. I would go so far as to describe youth as a desert of boredom lying between the mountains of childish elation and the ocean of adult preoccupations. What causes the present variation of this eternal theme to be played fortissimo is not that the opportunities for significant activity are growing less, but that, while remaining the same, they appear to be so much more numerous. Nowadays, people see so much more going wrong with the world over which they have the same meager control as before. The world now seems a stunningly ignoble place. It has not really grown all that much worse, but appears to have done so because we know so much more about it than we did. Communication, which the class magazines are always telling us we lack, is in fact an epidemic. Everything that happens anywhere is told to everyone in detail, at once and in color, and since, as the cliché goes, good news is no news, never a day passes but by proxy we are choked with tear gas, bludgeoned with sticks, robbed of millions, raped at the age of 11, and starved for a lifetime. The young have not the means to cure the ills of the world. They can only protest, the more angrily because it can be seen that their action is futile. It is years since marchers stopped impeding the normal flow of traffic between Aldermaston and Trafalgar Square, and still nuclear bombs are tested, and still more armaments pile up. To make matters even more pathetic, half the time the world savers are crying out against situations that are not ills at all. War is the most obvious of these. No less an authority than Sir Edmund Leach, the social anthropologist, states that to live under the perpetual threat of invasion is normal, and almost certainly salutary. We all knew it was normal. Even Walt Disney, the Archdeacon of Twee, did not try to bury this fact beneath a heap of sugar. In none of his nature films was there ever a single chipmunk that ate his lunch in peace. After seeing any of these movies, one felt that possibly small animals die as often from ulcers as from enemy activity. To say that war is salutary is another matter. The statement requires an explanation, and this Sir Edmund is prepared to give on behalf of the majority. It increases the solidarity of nations, he says, and reaffirms boundaries. This last remark is the first flash of style to illuminate the landscape in a long time. It is another and much more daring way of saying that without a frame there can be no satisfactory picture. It also makes it clear that, to great modern thinkers, human life is no longer sacred. We should have known that this would be so. Nothing except diamonds is above the law of scarcity value. Morality is expediency in a long white dress. Even the 10 Commandments are a set of survival laws handed down to Mr. Charlton Heston when he was transporting an extremely small band of people across a very hostile terrain. All moral superiority is founded on practical superiority. They are one, and this is, I think, what gives the majority a special gloss. What they do is right in a way that is never quite specified. Right for whom? Right in what way? Morality changes. Take the glib example that murder is forbidden, but that war is noble and heroic. That's a very old idea, but it's true. Morality is changeable, and it depends on what is geared to survival. 20th century leaders find themselves in the opposite position from Mr. Heston. They rule a concourse of men occupying standing room only in a world fruitful to the fringe of vulgarity, in some places, though less so in others. Perhaps what makes modern warfare seem unpleasant is not only the deadliness of its weapons, but also the nastiness of its propaganda. If it is absolutely necessary to get rid of people, it should not be necessary to disparage them. In nobler times, a warrior drank the blood of his adversaries, and wore the skulls of his enemies slung behind him like a university hood, in the hope of being pervaded by the glory of the conquered. A present-day warrior should kill no one whose head he would not be proud to mount on a mahogany shield and hang in the library. Whatever the reason, it cannot be denied that the joyous bang-bang of childhood degenerates somewhere along the line into an out-and-out condemnation of war by adolescence. To measure the intensity of this repugnance, we have only to recollect that in a town called Lille, the school children burned themselves to death in atonement for the wrongs done in Biafra. Almost all young people indulge in a daydream in which they spread out their arms and exclaim, "Take me, but save the world." But actually to throw away one's life after the crisis is past can be possible only when the whole world, present and to come, is intolerable. Whether rage is directed like a bullet against a particular target, or, as more often happens, like buckshot that sprays out generally, the cause is the same. Present-day society, with its constant change, its deafening communication, its almost total loss of definition, has produced a climate of bewilderment so profound that in it personality disintegrates in all but the most persistently self-aware. What we need, therefore, is a reaffirmation of personal boundaries. If to look upward is vain because, to put it politely, you know who is resting, and to gaze about us is unbearable, where else is there to look but within?